Moving on to the second segment, we have our 4 archivists with us, Kaustuv, Aparna, Githa ji, and Shwetal, and they will take us through their project processes. And we also have our respondents, as I mentioned earlier. Anita Reddy, artist, has also joined us online. Dr. Indra Chaudhary and architect Pooja Ograni are here with us in the hall. And once the project presentations are gone through, so each one of them will take 15 minutes. And when they've gone through that, we'll open up for a discussion through the comments of our respondents and then to the audience. Yes, so Kaustav, we'll start with you.
I'm Kaustav Chatterjee. I'm an art practitioner, not like a good archivist or in a way. So I recognize myself sometimes like a narrator, an unreliable narrator actually. I'm not even an historian archivist and also I'm just trying to process my archive, not my archive, like my ancestral archive through my practice. So here my project I am trying to develop is like I'm titled Projotme, which is care of. Like I'm trying to look at care, consciousness of care as archive, and through the archival objects and stories of my mother, her mother, and her mother, like my great grandmother, like great maternal grandmother. So I just wanna go through the slides, and yeah, this is the process I'm trying to like construct in through my practice. So here you can see a few names, like Ratna Chatterjee is my mother, and she got like her collection from her mother Pushparani Mukherjee, and Pushparani Mukherjee got her collection from her mother Nirmala Chatterjee. So and these are the names, and the location and places are like Shatkhira from Bangladesh, then Joshidi, Deoghar, Chuchura, and now those objects are in Boichigram. I mean, in Ratna Chatterjee's collection, and Ratna Chatterjee actually somehow like keeping those objects and materials in a way like it's just a casual domestic process. How we can just keep those things with care. So yeah, so the objects are I'm looking in a way like how objects are actually in mobility, in like in a transition. So yeah, we can just go through this, and the photographs of Pushparani Mukherjee, my maternal grandmother, and these another 2 photographs are of my mother, Ratna Mukherjee, and after she got married, she got her new son in Ratna Chatterjee. So yeah, these photographs actually before her marriage, and this is a photograph from my research notebook. How I'm trying to navigate and catalog the objects and stories I'm collecting, listening from my mother, grandmother. And these are few elements, components like I'm looking at. So the thing is like when I'm looking some photographs and immediately I'm getting into some stories, like heard stories, like my mother used to tell stories always, like whatever object it is or photograph. So these are the kind of taking notes like by seeing those photographs. And this is also a like image of a like tiger. Maybe it is a like it was a candle stand, and this I have never seen that this tiger candle stand, but it is from my mother's memory. So I tried to draw it. I don't know whether it is like that or not. And here I'm going to show the few objects from my mother's collection, not in the entire. So I can go through. So these objects are now in Boichigram from Ratna Chatterjee's collection. So yeah, this is a photograph of my maternal grandfather in his garden at Joshidi, Bihar. So my mother's past home, where like she can just remember a few things. These are the letters from my maternal grandfather when they were like shifting from Joshidi to Chinsura, making their new home. And here you can find those like small, like just casual notes and suggestions of making a new home, like how those like you can put the window there and like buying the bricks, etc. So you can find those like price also, like how much cost in that time. These are also photographs of Pushparani Mukherjee with her eldest daughter, son-in-law and granddaughter. So these are also collected from Chotura. And another one is in their one of like family tour. And and photograph here in a Puri. So I just when I had a conversation in my exhibit. So I just like through conversation I got the thing like here like a woman like yearning. So in that photographic process we don't have that kind of opportunity to cancel our photograph. Now we can take 10 photographs and choose, but these are like that. One photograph we can have only. So yeah, these all are album and print. These are related to new photographs from yeah, one is in a studio, like local studio, photo studio setup, and one is in a domestic place. And we can locate Ratna Chatterjee. And I mean, one photograph there is Ratna Mukherjee, and another one is Ratna Chatterjee. How she has like got her new surname. And this is a small, like tiny albia made of buffalo horn. This is from my maternal great grandmother from Bangladesh, and this is a childhood toy. So my mother is like keeping this in a way. I'm just trying to navigate those objects in terms of listening stories associated with these objects. And these also from my great maternal grandmother. And this Caesar is Ratna Chatterjee's father, and yeah, used to cut his mustas. This is my mother's toy from Deoghar. And this ceramic dish is from Pushparani Mukherjee's mother from Bangladesh. And I heard the story like when their son-in-law used to came to their house, and they used to uh, yeah, give them sweets and all. The brooch play. And it's a marble casket from Agra, my mother. I mean, I have like not like I have. My mother has like enormous collections of these kind of objects in a casual uh, uh, domestic manner, in a like just a wooden shelf or somehow in a table. So now I'm going to show a few embroidery works of my mother during her diploma degree course. I'm just trying to like catalog these things, like what is the name of this stage and etc. And so yeah, it's all in process. This embroidery named honeycomb, it's like that. This is a small sample katha work by my mother. So in through those objects and associated stories, I'm like as an artist, I'm trying to develop my practice, and I'm looking at archive as practice. So when I was I mean during that workshop throughout the months, and I got some perspective like how practice could be could act as like process of preservation and care. So like these all key words and elements I'm like getting in a way through the research process. And like with those archival objects and my practice, I'm like amalgamating two disciplines in a like through folklore, archival image, and domestic dissemination of history as framework. I'm trying to like regenerate and recreate archive in an alternative way. So this is a page from my research notebook, and this is the like process, initial process, how I was been struggling to add archival photographs into like creative practice. So I just got some printed, recreated version of those photographs and trying to juxtapose and put some words. So these are the kind of coming out like that, and this architecture space also from here stories from my mother, and that this architecture is no more. This is only some oral, like oral narratives or oral representation of architecture we can hear. So I just make a visual representation by hearing my mother. So maybe it's not like that exactly, but yeah, and put their photograph. I'm just seeing how it works. These are the like practice I'm going on with like through archival materials, recreating archives and stories. This is also a folded book. This is like collecting those stories and just writing through ink or color, pencil. It's a stretchable book actually. It's a page from my like everyday journal. It's a like title Road Namcha. So it's called everyday stories. Like these works I have been doing like dealing with my domestic space and doing domestic stories like since almost 7 years. So these are like the process how I have been developing through. I mean, coming into the archival materials to practice. These are two pages from like Bengali folklore folk story books gifted to I mean from my mother, gifted to her daughter. The book is ঠাকুমার ঝুলি. It's a like tales of I mean grandmother's tale. So this is like Gantha, how storytelling is a process. I'm just navigating through making Gatha, and there is a like key concern from where I got into the Gatha work and making Gatha and quilting the stories. And like I heard from my maternal grandmother this like how they brought money from Bangladesh by stitching on Gatha after the partition, like wrapping their kids. So and they built a small workshop in West Bengal near Bamungachi. So that story made me think like how we can go through Gatha making, and I've started collaborating with my mother since 6 months. So so there is those Gathas in like exhibit. I mean, I and my mother was been doing this. I mean, during the an afternoon and the whole winter season on our ancestral home roof. And these are few images from the process doing like washing the old saris, and yeah, this is the one more big one Gatha. One big one Gatha is this is also in process. Not, I mean, this is here in the exhibit. And this is in my home. This is in Bengali text. Shona Katha, it means like heard stories. It's a small one. Yeah, so this image is screenshot from my one video works like I've installed here. And why archive as practice, I have been like working on, and practice is vice versa. Like I'm looking at archive as practice. So domestic practice of like object keeping, and they are like how we are keeping it through our like care and like our like domestic effort we are giving to objects. I mean towards those objects and stories. So I'm like looking on that, and like how objects and human are actually associated in a like very utilitarian manner. There's no like other kind of notion of consciousness of I mean, archiving. So this is only thing there is ownership, like it is mine. So and like transition of those objects and like keeping one place to another and shifting those objects and like time and like how spaces are like locations are changing. So yeah, so those things, objects, stories, and transition, amnesia, care through the like 3 generations of mother. I'm looking uh, through those archives and re-establishing, trying to establish a alternative process of preservation of domestic archives through practice. So yeah, this is my initial process. So definitely need to develop and go through like more ways and all. So thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to present my archival attempts under Ishita's guidance over the past several months. So, curating public archives 22 to 23, constructing CPA. I have titled my project Historians in the House, and it's also called The Inheritance of Memory. So what I want to do is, we've all studied history in school, and I actually, and many others like me, we always found it to be like a sort of a subject that you have to study, until one fine day my father told me about his lifetime in the Second World War in Madras, and at a time when Japanese planes were flying overhead, and his grandfather was an air warden who had to sound the siren. So that really got me thinking, and I was really intrigued by that. And I was thinking if we could encourage more young people to engage with the elders in their family so that they could similarly possibly get a better sense of who they are, like what is their historical footprint, and maybe understand history better from that lens. So I wanted them to start engaging with family narratives, and I thought that could be a good sort of a pedagogical construct. So I'm exploring family elders, artifacts, oral histories as archival material, with the intent of looking at it as a pedagogical resource as well. These are the following lenses through which we could look at the material that I've put forth today in my exhibition there behind you. Social, cultural, political, education, life under foreign rule, as well as earning a profession, earning a livelihood, class, caste and privilege, and the parent-child relationship. So why am I interested in the inheritance of memory? And I think that sort of comes down to us as a culture. We are very, very prone as a culture to bequeath things that we have to future generations. We love doing that. In fact, jewelry, property, all of that, those are the things that are bequeathed. But in my experience, I felt that it is the inheritance of memory that is not explored sufficiently as something that is of wealth and consequence. That's one. The second influence was that, like there were all these historical names that were just bandied around since my childhood, like names like Emden, which was this German warship that had bombed Madras Harbor in first 2 decades of the 20th century. There was victory in Europe Day. My father witnessed the Bengal famine. There was something called the Sharda Act, which came in to prevent child marriages. And actually, many people in my family traveled from Madras to Bangalore because Madras was the Madras presidency, and you could not be married as a minor. So they had to come to Bangalore because Bangalore was under the Maharaja and the rules were different. So these were all like names that we just heard, and it was only as I grew up I realized that it had so much of historical consequence that we were actually a part of history, and that's when I became interested in the Living Histories project. So this is roughly around the time when my engagement with memory began, and so these are the places where these are some conferences that I attended, and I looked at memory through many, many lenses. So the place of memory and the memory of place was about childhood homes. Memory in a digital age was about, how does memory, like what are the consequences of digital memory? Who owns the right to memory? What is the role of nostalgia in a digital age? So that's what, so on and so forth. And I won't go into all of them. Now, what are the lived histories that I have, that, my family has been talking about? So the World Wars, Emden. Now, this is all a chronological list. The bombing by the German ship Emden, the Quetta earthquake. So my forefathers were posted in Lahore and Quetta when they were a part of British India. Then there was the Japanese air raids, the victory in Europe Day, the Sharda Act, entire British rule, the Bengal famine, independence, and of course beyond. Okay, so this is how I develop my personality. So first, starting in the innermost, I have a family memory, for instance. Sometimes the memories are like oral narratives. Sometimes I also have materiality in the shape of in the form of actual objects. Then I get into text, documentation, and an artistic outcome. And then finally, I look at a mass medium. How do you put it out into the public? How do you disseminate that knowledge and find an artistic output? Now, so there are two ways I've looked at this. One is, suppose oral narratives come to you. What is the pathway to textuality or to the documentation that you want to do? So first I have interviews. I make them audio, video documentation. And then there is a process from orality to textuality to the artistic output that I mentioned. Then I share it with descendants or with students, whoever my stakeholders are, to collect the responses to be used as data. Like, how is Gen Z engaging with the data that, the vintage data that I'm presenting to them? What are their responses? Are they, all that is very valuable data. I'm going to share a very short interview with my father, not the entire thing, but just to get it started. Yeah, so he basically talks about his childhood in Lucknow and how he faced discrimination as a person of color. So it was not all hunky-dory, even though his father was very well placed and had a very good position under the Raj. It wasn't all smooth sailing, and he was in Lucknow. He recalled that it was a time of great sort of inclusion, especially between religions. He remembered a marriage in the Nawab of Mahmudabad's family. Oops. Okay, now I got it. Now, this is from my mother, who has the next one. She remembers a memory victory in Europe, which when she went to school in Bishop Cotton, they had to draw and make an illustration to celebrate that victory. And this was the first bit of documentation and archiving that I did. So what I did was, the place where I work, Srishti, has a project called Art in Transit. And they were collecting and collating Bangalore stories to be given to commuters. So this was one thing which I made for Art in Transit. And it's Bangalore under British rule. It's a narrative from family histories. And this is my mother's recollection of VE Day. And she told me orally how she drew it out. And then I had it illustrated. Obviously, more recently I had it illustrated. So there's a road of people. They were all like waving flags, and this was when the war ended. Now, the seen and the unseen, which is something I was telling Aparna also earlier, is sometimes when you have an object. So yes, you look at the object, but what are aspects of the object that you cannot see? So I'm taking the example of the British Indian passport belonging to my grandfather, which is here, he got it in 1926. So I just have one page and it's not completely visible. Yes, so, but what you cannot see, for instance, is, it's the literature of colonial government. So if you look at the picture of the passport and the literature inside it, extremely colonial. It's a process finding from textuality to orality via memory. There's a seen and the unseen, for instance. You can see privilege. There's the social caste implications, and then there's, of course, the Kala Pani that people talk about, the social caste implications of crossing the waters. So once again, this will be shared with descendants to collect data. Yeah. Now, these are letters, materiality. So my great-grandfather's admission to the public's work department. Mr. Miller, who's the head of the Madras Christian College, had written this reference for him to join work at Lahore. Similarly, if you look at this postcard, it's dated back to 1945. It was sent to my father by his father, and he says, "I leave tonight for London, but I have a good stock or store of French stamps for you. And this is so ironic we're hearing this here because the stamp collection is right there. These are also questions. These are also letters for my great grandfather to get a position in Lahore. So I'm very interested in this, and there's a university in England that's also interested in these letters because they want to look at it from the language of colonialism, what it meant to be employed, the calligraphic text, so on and so forth. I mean, they haven't mentioned exactly completely what they want to look at, but they are collecting and collating. So this is another example of materiality, and to bring in the storytelling, the oral storytelling, what I have been working on, as many of you have been seeing, the use of QR codes to connect the object to an oral narrative. So this is my legacy from the Mysore state, and that is my grandfather on a bicycle, and this is the emblem of the Maharaja K. Krishnaraja Warrior KRW, which was given to people who worked for the services. I'm also really interested. So there are all these mini projects that are opening up. Like in the process, I'm interested in the studio culture of the time, what people wore, and why did they go to a studio? Because it must have, was it an occasion? Because sometimes people are dressed up like now, or sometimes they dress very casually. I want to look at it as a habit because I have so many studio pictures. I also want to look at the studio as a business. Yeah, done. Oops. So here's a studio in Mount Road. I've been trying to find out and find connections to many of the studios that have been closing down. Now, what are some of the engagements how have I taken this forward? So after a workshop on material memory with children aged between 9 to 13, I brought out a book via my publishing house, Timbuktu, and this book is called Precious, which some of you have already looked at. These are the inside pages. So the children had to engage with these objects from their family members and get the memory from their elders. Write it in the first person from the object's point of view, so to trace history, geography, people, places, and movement. And here is, so it was featured at the Bangalore Lit Fest, and these are the generations. So grandmother, a mother, and her two daughters. And this is the grandmother's feedback about how she felt about the passing of a coin that was, dated back to independent India and partition, and why it's important for continuity. Now, this is how I have taken this archival material forward. Yesterday's workshop, these are the people who attended, once again, 3 generations. I have also, the transfer of information from materiality to orality. For instance, I've taken my stamp collection. I have brought in a QR code in which this visitor is listening to my father's oral narrative, connecting, so thereby connecting orality and textuality. And finally, before I say thank you, I have to say thank you, Ishita. So we started off by collating interviews, videos, photos of material and memory. And what I really gained from the workshops was, for instance, I had no idea about the importance of permissions, representations, and copyright. And I remember these conversations in the workshop about how, many people can sort of stake a claim to a particular memory or to a particular artifact, or they may say that they may contest the memory, for example. Legal documentation, and this led me to make a list of vintage items given to me, which my father then went on to sign. I understood the liability of owning antiques without proof of ownership. There was the entire importance of digital archiving and storage of data. We were exposed to Lekha also, which I had started work on, and then of course the cataloging and metadata. So thank you.
Thank you, Ishita, for this 2 days workshop on collecting personal archives. It has given a new perspective as to how there are various ways of collecting and digitalizing, various ways of making archives. And it is also not personal, community, and otherwise. And I'm already thinking on my next project, what I should do. And I will come back to you to help me out. So thank you so much, Ishita. I feel that life is not about accepting the reality of life itself. Because I did accept the reality that my husband is no more. He passed away on the 7th of April 2022. But I felt that this is just not sufficient. Me mourning and then that's it. I thought I should do something touching lives. Because sometimes this, people don't come out of this mourning. I have friends who have lost their husbands. 2-3 years, there is no closure. So I just thought maybe if you write about your husband, maybe that will be a sort of a catharsis. But then I'm too ambitious. I wanted the book to be released for his first death anniversary. And it was in November 2022 that I went to Ishita's community archival at the metro station, wherein I got the idea as to how I can go about. So then I attended 3 of her workshops, and that by which time I was already 1 foot into what I was doing. So I thought I was very smart because I am not writing, I am collecting the memories. I reached out to the community of his colleagues, friends, and relatives and told them, please give me a small note about what you remember about Rao. Let it be plus, minus, anything. Even the negative thing is also accepted because the person is not always good. And then I did receive, though I had to pursue and all that. So within a span of 5 months, I had this book ready on, it was released on April 16th. And this is the book. Thanks to the support of everyone who contributed. And what I did was, I have invited 15 assets of society, people like ambassadors, then a Japanese consul general, and then architect from London. I made them write why personal, archiving is very important, because this is a book about my husband, which is interesting to the people who know him. But what about people who don't know him? How do I interest them? Not in my husband, but also to put a step in archiving their family histories, a micro narrative. So I got this foreword. Instead of one person writing the foreword, there were 15 people who have wrote these forewords, and they have expressed why it is very important to document. I'll just read out from Ambassador Gurjit Singh, who was a former ambassador to Germany, Indonesia, Ethiopia, ASEAN, and the African Union, and is presently the former IIT Indore. He writes, it is extremely important to document family histories, since families are now becoming more diversified and moving across continents into different areas. Marriages are becoming intercontinental too. Future generations will be brought up in a milieu other than ours and have perhaps more than one family history to fall back upon. So the huge data that they have, how do they document that? It is simply lost and memories get fragmented. Then I have this from Dr. Prerana Shrimal, who says that family histories humanize the people we know or knew and are remembered for those who did not know them. As I sat with Dr. Githa and read through the draft versions of this interesting book, the generation slipped away as I shared her grief for a moment. In reading her words, I felt closer to my own grandmother that I ever have, even though I was reading about Raghu. That evening I spent with her made me know him better through various eyes, various anecdotes, and through various memories. It was a most enlightening time for me, one I treasure because it forced me to look at my life, reshape in many ways, and laugh at things that I have taken so seriously before. I matured in the many ways. It also freed me from some of my doubts and fears about my past, present, and future. This form of writing is reflective. It is about investing in oneself and in one's family. It can also be therapeutic. Why I'm reading is she was supposed to come today and have she was the respondent for me, but then there was a tragedy in the family and she was very upset that she could not make it. So I'm reading it, though it's a little bit lengthy. Then I have another one from Professor M.N. Venkatesham, who is the Dean, School of Human Social Sciences, Department of Folklore and Tribal Studies, Dravidian University. So he says, personal family narratives are decoding our own family expressions, multi-layered narratives, and creating a dialogue with the other members, especially the younger generation in absentia. It is a tribute that is first collected orally and documented in written format for posterity. It stimulates the family members to a broader understanding of their ancestors, which make them pause and relook at life from a different perspective, creating an inclusive space. It's a challenge. Here is a challenge taken of such reflections and documentation about our dearest Raghavendra Rao. He was a person who silently inspired many through his deeds and affectionate actions, and the same is reflected in this memoir. What triggered this was, there was one, as soon as my husband passed away, one of the persons whom I knew, he reached out to me and he said, "Ma'am, can I put an obit of Raghavendra Rao?" I was surprised. He was a person who worked with my husband 20 years ago. So I said, why would anybody want to do it? But I said, okay, go ahead. I'll catch up with you for some time. Then I got some messages. And the way that came, it was not respectful or love, but it was bordering on reverence. So I thought, who is this gentleman who is my husband? But I hardly know him. This technocrat, who is he? And then I realized that it is high time I make a comprehensive understanding of who this person is, because this book is not simply a book about one person. I made this as a tribute and as a passing on a legacy to my granddaughter, who will be 1 year next month, June 2nd, and because she's a Swedish citizen, and maybe I don't know whether she will understand the Indian values, her parents will definitely put in, but I thought I wanted to bring her grandfather alive in these pages. He is not just a name, he is not just a photograph, but for her, through this book, he comes alive. And I think that it will be like a Bhagavad Gita for her, that whenever she is in doubt, because if you read this book, there are people who have given so many things, how he has touched them, and how today some of them are CEOs of U-Drugs, a Japanese company, and they say that when we are in doubt, when we get very angry, because they're all in top levels, we just remember our boss, Raghavendra Rao, how he used to relate to these situations. And that has made us what we are today. It has brought us to this thing, because it's not only as an administrator, but the human quality of that administrator that endures. And I think a cool thinking also makes you think in a different way. So there are many such things that the people have written. And I think I'm not wrong in saying that he was a very simple-minded person who was not at all ambitious. I used to get angry for him, because if he was a little bit ambitious, I'm not exaggerating when I say he would read in the lines of Mr. Mohandas Pai and Nandan Leela. He would have been a TED speaker. But this man, there is one writing who says that one HR person from Bosch, he was the he retired as general manager for Bosch, who says that he was such a simple person who did not even mind when his bosses took the credit. The entire SAP in Bosch is because of my husband's intervention. He developed SAP in this thing so much so Kalyani called him and he said, if Mr. Rao is coming only, I will give. It was a turnover. And he turned over that the company within 1.5 years. And even to this day, after 10 years after retirement, he would get calls and I would ask, why are you answering this call? He would sit for 2 or 3 hours and take them through a series of steps. So only from these accounts that I came to know, he was the author of a template for a software design, which is being used in Bosch even today across Europe, Asia, and India. And he had, systemized it and customized it to Indian conditions. So that's why whenever new persons come, they would call Rao because he was the architect of the template. And even then, he never said that it is my baby that I'm doing. He said, no, we have to help them. So I write in my preface here, Raghu's life was such that it supported the spirit rather than the material world. Like Tai Chi, he was a meditation in motion as he led a very contented and simple life that is not as simple as it may sound, as it takes courage and an enlightened life. His was a life focusing on the good in everything and everyone. And it is not that everything in life was good, but he chose to see good in everyone. So I don't know. I don't know. When I wrote this, it was so much of an emotional upheaval because I also at times didn't see the goodness. Being a husband, maybe I've taken it for granted. And in one of the accounts, they say that whenever he felt upset, which was very rarely, he would just rub his eyes and then remove his specs, which he did at times. When I would vigorously fight with him, I did not realize. I thought there was something in his eye. So these are facets of information, nuggets which I hold very dear that bring my husband in a different light. So that's why I always say that we must think and live in the three dimensions of the past, present, and future. Because everything is important, all these three aspects. If we feel that one aspect is to be avoided, then our perspective of life becomes different. It is something which we will not be able to understand. That's why I say to the youngsters, past provides a perspective wherein it constructs the life of your departed. Because I'm talking about departed, you can also make it for the living grandparents. The grandchildren can sit and learn so many things and become better individuals. I think also the past provides identity. It is the pictures, the objects, letters, certificates that establish a story connection with our family member or our ancestors. And the past adds depth because it makes people very real and human and not just a name or a picture in an album. And I chose this physical method because digitalization was very easy. You type it, you finish it off. I had to do lots of proofreading, running around to the publisher who was 1.5 hours drive from my home. And I had to do that 5 times in a month, the month of March, May. So I did go for this and not the digital one because there is pleasure in holding a book in hand and spelling the print, number one. Number two, it is always there for ages. It can pass on to generation as a legacy. This will become, I'm sure this will become a book which is to be treasured for my granddaughter's daughter, or whoever, or maybe the other members, extended members in the family. So that's why, because of all these aspects, the past needs to be documented. It is to leave a legacy for the future generations, as people are very interested. Every person has a story to tell and every story has a value. So why not? And we are great storytellers. If you see our Panchatantra translated into 146 languages, aren't we the greatest storytellers? We have forgotten the art of storytelling. So let us revive it by bringing out the stories of our past, of our ancestors, and make our lives more meaningful. So much.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for coming, and thank you for everyone who's joining online. I'm going to start my presentation with a little bit of history of why I'm here and how this whole thing started for me. So, this happened like about 9 years ago, 2014. My math is always bad. When a student of mine asked me, why should we do folk dance while we are in the city? Okay. folk dances for villagers. And I sat with this question thinking I have done folk dance all my life because I grew up in Baroda in Gujarat. And since my childhood, before memory, I think I would say I do not have a memory of any year when I've not done Garba, which means even before I could remember I've been doing Garba. So, and I never thought of it as a folk dance. So let me go and do a PPT presentation for them. I thought I was going to do a PPT presentation for them, but I went and I started asking people about the story of the history of Baroda, of Garba and all that. And yes, so that is how this thing began. But before I go into more, I'm going to do some clarifications. So the problems of being famous and popular. It's not me, but it's Garba. It's Garba because Garba is so popular, Navratri is so popular, Gujaratis are so loud. So we assume that anyone you talk to, they know about Garba, they know about Navratri. So I had a couple of people who even walked in yesterday and they like murmured and said, this Garba, this Gujarat, this is their clothes, and then they walk past. So, and I think somewhere even people who live there, because we are celebrating it every year on year, we take it for granted that we know what it is. And the other thing is that one is people take it for granted. One is people also assume a lot of things about it, including people who are celebrating it. So for me, myself, my experience, now I had to kind of think about what was this experience that I had. So I started with the inquiry, there was research, there was a lot of oral history collected, there was a lot of audio, video content apart from oral history, old video footage, photographs and people started giving as soon as I started asking. And I unraveled many stories which were like right next to me, but I didn't know about them, about a college that I had studied in. I had no idea, the Faculty of Fine Arts, what impact it had on the whole city and everything. I also did not know that, yes, there was a time when this folk festival, just like other folk festivals, or folk, not even the festival, the folk form, just like in other cities or in other parts of India, some folk dances have been relegated to stage shows or performances. Garba also went through this kind of a cycle, and somewhere again it was revitalized. Now I'm just going to run the teaser over here. The teaser will not have audio, but that just gives me more time to talk. So I will just, I'm just going to run it behind because there's some, I'm not able to run it or. So the teaser, so this is a teaser to the film I made with all the footage that I had collected. I unraveled some stories, history, all that. And for me, it was a big project because I'm not a filmmaker. So I started from learning how to use the camera, what kind of questions to ask, everything. It was like a learning process for me. And, kind of also getting the emotions, tapping into people's emotions, which were very high. Very high. And the thing about this is that when I started documenting somewhere in May, and by the time I was in August or September, the emotions were really high because, the Garba was just right around the corner. So I did this, and what I didn't realize is that this was just the beginning, me making the film. Because after that, I had to take the film to places, I had to screen it, I had to do that. So that was an entirely, do you want me to pause and just look at it? Because I So the next process that started once the film was made was to then take it to people, take it to schools, take it to colleges, take it to cultural institutions. It was more challenging, I would say, than making the film because it's one thing. So even like one of the questions I've been asking people is, how are you going to reach the people you want to? And also it became something that who am I making this for? Because I started by making it for the school kids. School kids were long forgotten. Then I was doing it for myself. Then I was doing it for people of Baroda. So, the thing about who am I doing this for became a question for me. And when I started doing the screenings, I started going from one school to another. I went to some villages. I started getting more information, small nuggets, bits and pieces here and there. Then people started taking my email ID. They would write to me. They would tell me stories. And so I have people who write to me in very broken English, somewhere from some village, even now, and they will say, I have found this. This is something that I'm working on. So it was a project that was not leaving me. I was very happy to abandon it at some point because it was becoming too much. But it was something that was not leaving me. So and every Navratri had become a funnel of all kinds of information related to Garba, whether I wanted it or not. So, yeah. So this is what the film is about. And the full film has kind of become means for me to kind of talk about the work I'm now going to do, because I've also sat upon this for a long time. Even if the information was coming, I didn't know what to do with it. I would sometimes write blogs. I would write about some information that I have. I would sometimes make a short video with the extra footage that I have, because I have about, 80 hours of just oral history. And I have transcribed all of it also, because at that time it was all in Gujarati. That's another challenge, which was a question for me, because I have studied in English. But I discovered that, this whole thing about language is so interesting, because I'd started discovering things about myself. So that became a place for me to say, okay, I am discovering something about myself. Maybe this is something I can offer to people who are already enjoying it. Now, this is where I feel my archive is a little different, and I'm always a little hesitant to talk about it, because I'm not archiving something that's gone. I'm not archiving something that's dead, and I'm archiving something that's alive. There is a sense of joy, and I feel that there is a need to understand what gives people joy. I think we're not documenting that enough, and I think somewhere I chanced upon it, and I feel very fortunate to do that. Yeah. So while I was doing Ishita's course, I was still very uncomfortable about this whole idea of archiving, because I know people in Gujarat. I know who I am. I have a son who is dyslexic, and I've been telling Ishita also about it. That I know that accessing archives, going to see things and all that is going to be a challenge for a lot of these people who I feel should be seeing the archives or should be seeing the information that I'm doing. And then I kept thinking, and then it occurred to me that I am documenting something that's happened in a city. Okay. And this question that the student had raised first about why are we doing folk dance in a city is actually still relevant, because we are not doing something which is actually the Navratri, the festival, the religious part, and everything is true. But the way we are celebrating it is not what we are living. We are not wearing the clothes that we wear every day. So if you're in a village, you're probably wearing the same clothes that you wear through the day. Maybe you just clean up and you go for the festival. So we are actually tapping into an archive of our collective history, our social life, everything that's around us. And we are kind of accessing it for those 9 days and enjoying it. And I thought this was something that I need to really flesh out as an idea and understand that how can I now build on this concept. So this is what I'm working on. The other thing that I want to talk about is, and which I forgot to mention about when I had to say about popular and famous, is that people often ask me that why are you doing about Baroda? Because Garba is done everywhere. It's also done in the US, it's done in Bombay, it's done in every other city. But what people don't realize, and this is again about something being very famous, that there is a blanket term given to it, that okay, Navratri or Garba or Dandiya, as popularly known as Dandiya everywhere. Okay, the Dandiya is not even a word. Dandiya Ras is the folk form, but people just call it Dandiya for convenience. But every city of Gujarat, and I'm talking about cities, because when we talk about the rural landscape, it's very, very connected to what is happening in that, including the soil. The soil dominates the kind of dance form that comes out. So, if you're in maybe Saputara and you're in a hilly area, you are probably going to do something which is more linear, as against when you're on a flat plain. So all these things define your dance form. But in a city, we are doing something which is adapted from a rural scenario, and each city has its own identity. So I'm using Baroda as a place from where I am going to use it as a window to unravel everything that I have experienced. And when I'm saying my experience, it's not just mine. The idea is to collect experiences of people in Baroda. So that becomes the lens. And at the same time, we're going to unravel. So so that becomes a window. So what are the songs that you heard? So songs didn't come from Baroda. They didn't originate from there. They came from all parts of Gujarat. And how did those, what do those songs tell you? What are those clothes you're wearing? Where did that chania come from? Where did that gagra come from? And what I feel is that, again, what is the point of doing it? Everyone's anyway wearing those clothes. Everyone's anyway going and doing garba. I think to make the experience that much richer, because I think I have experienced that, and whenever I share it, I realize that that becomes that much more important. So yeah. So now when I'm beginning to break it into things, now archiving, I realize is a lot about putting things into their spaces, understanding. So I have songs, I have text, I have music, I have rhythm, I have people's interviews and experience. And while I'm working through it, I suddenly realized that everything is embedded in everything. And in a festival, the minute you start deconstructing something, you start losing the essence. So it's extremely important for me to keep the information can be, partition, but I need to keep connecting the dots. So something as simple as somebody says, oh, but in Baroda, you people are very strict. You need to wear chania choli. Otherwise, in Bombay, we can wear jeans and go into Garba. Now, I think it's a choice. I think people do have a choice to wear what they like, and I don't think anyone should be telling you what to do. But when I hear a song which mentions abla, abla is the small glass pieces that we put on, the mirror work that we see in. The word abla means a bit of sky, or, it comes from the word sky, and that when those words get connected to your clothes and you're dancing in jeans, you're probably missing out on some experience. Or I'm saying, choose. You could still think about the abla and wear your jeans, but know that this is the connection. So making those connections, I felt, started becoming important for me, as well as unraveling lyrics and music and everything. So here it is. So, the music, the clothes, and, this slide, I kind of wanted to make it into 5 slides, and I made it into 1 slide, again made it into 5 slides, and because I felt they need to be seen together. They're the same thing. Your body is an archive. So, people say, Baroda or Gujarat people, as soon as the beat starts, you start dancing. But that's true of any other activity that we do. And what I realize is that a lot of these things are embedded in us. And I'm also thinking about how does it help us to, so the other day we had a workshop. Yesterday we had a workshop, and at the end of it, we also, all of us did Garba together. So sometimes, and I've been listening to these presentations and thinking about a lot of social issues, a lot of things. We can analyze them, but I feel to think about what is going to impact us socially, it's going to be these interactions. It's going to be coming together. It's going to be about sharing, not talking, maybe just sharing, maybe a rhythm, maybe just sharing a space. And that itself may teach us a lot without deconstructing a lot of things. Our lyrics, and the other thing that I have been struggling with, to be very honest, is putting a lot of things, because the English language doesn't help when I am translating. It's very difficult. I can get the context by writing a long passage, or I can get, the relevance of something over there. But it's like, how do you can describe orange juice, but you can keep describing it, but you have to drink it to know what it is. Okay. Ishita said 3 minutes. Okay. So yeah. So the other thing that I feel that the reason I'm archiving this, and I'm going to go quickly on this part, is the aesthetics of a festival and how change can be influenced. And that is something that I have experienced over the years in Baroda, how people have made an impact at some point. And I feel that, so I have this photograph of Pritpal Singh Ladi, who's a sculptor, who's a Sikh, and who has introduced steps in Baroda, in Garba. And here there is a step from Manali, which has got introduced over here. And I'm saying things will change. Things will change. How are we going to, impact the change? And that is where I think this kind of a project can come into play. I have some samples over here. They were music, but I think we can't play music. But what I was going to talk about is, again, change in music and lyrics, and how, a lot of times we see that people play Bollywood music or, some other stuff. And somewhere in Baroda, I felt over the years, they have stayed away from, that kind of a thing. So what I realized is when I was looking into the poetry that is being, used. So there is suppose an old song, which is probably 100 years old, which goes vaya ne vadal umadya. Now you may not know the meaning, but va means wind and vaya means moved. And that is an old song. There is a new song which is written by a new poet, which is Samira Manda 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 Vai, which Samir is a very literary term. Va is a very colloquial term. So there is still this poetry being used, and it may be more contemporary, but it is, again, it is about aesthetics. What are you going to choose at the end of the day in a festival? And you will choose if you know. And that's where I feel that unraveling these, deconstructing and showing it to people may have its things. Under this, I have also started working on different clusters of societies within Baroda, which have impacted the festival. And in that, the Faculty of Finance being one, the inner fort city, the walled city as they call it, that being one. There are similar such small areas which have, again, a microculture within a culture. And I feel those need to be examined. So that is what I'm going to do. And in Faculty of Finance, I'm also going to look into how the artists who came and studied in Baroda have now gone out, and if there has been an impact on their work, if this festival has had an impact on them. So yes, basically this is the work. An important question that I have been kind of talking about through the presentation is, who is this for? How will it reach them? So a couple of things that I have been doing even before, unknowingly that I was doing it, is doing workshops and these screenings, meeting people, engaging with people, because I felt that is very important. The other thing that I have now started doing is archiving personal photographs. And I feel that will build a community of people who are interested in knowing what I'm doing. And through them, so like if those who have given me photographs can also give me 2 songs that they remember from their childhood. It will not, I may have a collection of 200 songs in the end, but I think what I will more importantly have is maybe 25 people or 50 people who are now invested and will be talking about it to another 5 people. And I think that is way more important in a festival like this than actually having an archive where I have documented 200 songs, because I don't know who is going to go and look at those songs. I have my doubts about that. I don't know. And yeah, I'm going to do a very good thing over here, which is basically going to ask, like, this is what I need for the project to move ahead. And that is that, and yeah, I've given this is like a temporary name for the archives, which is Banyan Tree Garba Archives. I may make it a Gujarati, like Vadla Niche Garba. But for the Banyan Tree, Baroda, the name of the city comes from the Banyan Tree, Vadodara, Vad. And that's why the banyan tree. And Garba, because Garba is a folk form. It is done in Navratri, it is done in weddings, it is done when we are happy. And we also do it, like the other day, there was a song, like my mom brought it in the workshop, which is a very sad song, but sung to a happy tune. And which is where I feel that there is this, sometimes these kind of coming together as our catalyst for catharsis, and acknowledging them, documenting our joys is going to give us something. We may not be able to articulate it in words and give it, but it may have a benefit. I also talk about the self-esteem of people in India collectively, which I think I always feel a little sad how we do not really enjoy our our culture from our own lens. Very often we need somebody else to tell us what we are worth. But if we're having fun and if we're enjoying something, I think it will affect our self-esteem. And then if we know something more about it, I think even more so. So I think these are all motivators for me. So yes, I need people who can mentor me for, of course, archiving, grant writing, research methodology, because I'm still working through all these things, learning them on the go. And at a very practical level, somebody who can help me with graphic design and digital data management. So I'm putting it out there, maybe online, somebody, and if Ishita puts up the recording somewhere and somebody else. Thank you, Ishita. Thank you very much, because I think somewhere I didn't realize the work I had done till I got onto this program. So apart from getting it streamlined, I also realized what I've done. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shwetal, Aparna, Githa ji, and Kaustuv. Thank you so much. Just going to stop sharing. All right. Everyone online, you can also switch on your camera. We can see you, and we open it up to our respondents first. Dr. Ridra Chaudhary, architect Pooja Ugrani, and artist Anita. Whoever wants to go first, share your thoughts, comments, questions for the participants.
Thank you, Shita. I should first start out by thanking you, because this kind of initiative is very, very important for us. I think we are not a culture that openly archives things and displays them. So I've enjoyed this process over the years very much. But I was asked to comment on Shwetal's project. That's the project I've really looked at a great deal of detail, though I've enjoyed a lot of the other projects, and I'm sorry I missed the showcase yesterday. I think what struck me as particularly important, when we talk about archives, as academics, as archivists, I'd say we are often looking at material that is not museum material. That is not. They are often letters, often maybe they're recordings of oral histories more recently. But we've looked at paper archives more often than not. And that's why when Shwetal showed me her project and she was talking about the festival itself as an archive, it took my academic brain a little bit of time to absorb what that meant. And what excited me once I understood that was the fact that, the festival actually has these songs that are from all over Gujarat. And they are ways of embroidering. There are songs that talk about everyday objects, and the way that keeps shifting. So I began to get a glimpse of what she meant when she said the festival itself was archive. And I think what your presentation does to do in the way that you're showcasing here does, and I think that's true of everybody, because you're here presenting it in a certain form, is that the fact that this is the MS University Baroda's Fine Arts Department, which has trained a range of our artists in India, and the way in which they have absorbed various aspects of what is so-called folk culture, and the way that culture comes from all over Gujarat and comes into Burunda. In terms of what's worn, what's sung, and what you're doing now of talking to artists who don't belong to Gujarat but have had that influence, that I find very exciting. And I think you showcase that rather well. So I think I also want to talk about the other projects that I saw today, Kaustav's as well as Aparna's and Githa's. And I think in many ways you brought in family, but you have moved beyond that. And I think when I started doing oral histories with my own family, I began to realize that it wasn't a matter of including them in the larger history of India. It was really about saying, oh, they have lived through a time and now I'm able to see that. And I think Kaustav did that through craft, through the Gatha. And I was looking at it and remembering, and I think that's what Sridhar was telling us to do, to remember how it resonates with what we did. And in case of Kaustav, I was telling him how I remember taking out the thread from the border of saris that my grandmother would save, so that with that thread she could make the kanthas. And he agreed. He said, yes, that's how. You never bought thread to make your gown. You never bought anything. You researched things. And I think in case of Aparna, I was thinking, she's raising important questions about what does it mean to work in a colonial, setup. What does it mean to, you have some taboos about what you eat, what you not eat. And there you are, you're working with white people. What does it mean for them? And I think looking at this very moving project that Githa put together, it struck me that, there's so much that we don't know as families about each other, about what. And I think her attempt was to bring that together. So I'm just sort of putting on record what I enjoyed about this, and I think can be taken. With that, I pass.
Hi everyone. I think I find myself in a place where I learned more than I can share. It was more of listening that happened to me right from the beginning. I think a few doubts that I still carry with me. I think the first reaction is that how does it resonate with my own personal history? And I think I'm going to open that up at some point of time. But how do you draw that line between being very personal, or how do you kind of get carried away? Because this premise is delicious to a point where it will just absorb you entirely. And how do you anchor yourself in a study such as this? And especially with family histories, when it is so close to you, you tend to get very emotional about all of this. How do you then structure something? That was a doubt that kind of lingers with me. And the other thing, again, I come from a personal point of view, is if I have to think that I need to have these kinds of conversations with my family right now, how do you convince them about the fact that something like this is important? This may be an echo chamber where all of us, find it relevant and important to kind of do what we are doing here right now. But if you're speaking to someone who's close to you, sometimes also in a power differential higher to you, and you're trying to, ask them for some information, how do you then navigate that conversation? These are two questions that are probably open out to a larger.
So, and I don't have an answer for it, but I can just talk from what I have experienced, is that I was doing something that everyone connected to it. Like everyone felt very strongly. So I have had experiences where people have been very, very harsh with me and said, you have no right to document this. it does not belong to you that you can make. See, there is this possessiveness about your culture. And there are people who have said, come into my house and I will give you everything I have. We need to get this out there. So I think it depends on each person's, way of dealing with, and sometimes it's an emotional decision. Initially I used to think it's about copyright, it's about, having some intellectual rights about some songs or something. But I realize it's that person's, way of dealing with situations. It's not so transactional also, and probably it needs work sometimes. Sometimes they've seen the work that I've done, and then, there's a softening, and there's like, okay, let's take the next step over here. So, that has been my experience.
So thanks for the question, Pooja. I'll take the first part of it. It's quite common actually to get very, very overwhelmed by the, just the sheer scale of information available to you. And then, you don't know, okay, where do you start and what is the narrative? So I think it's important to sort of find that particular hook around which you want your narrative to, sort of the through line that you wanted to proceed along. I think in my case, there was a whole lot of information, particularly, artifacts, letters, But, as Aparna Vedic said earlier, we must caution against celebrating. So, as a child, we were all raised with a particularly predominant narrative about how great these people were, and how they had these top positions, blah, 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 until one fine day, someone said, okay, so, in fact, Mr. Raghavan, who came yesterday, he was in the workshop, he recognized my great-grandfather. He said, oh, this is Mr. K. Venkataraman. And, he knew him for some professional reason. But, coming back to the question, I think it's important to, look at the predominant narrative, not get too overwhelmed by the narrative that we've been fed, but ask questions that we haven't asked earlier. Like I keep coming back to the seen and the unseen. What are we not seeing? One day somebody asked me, how do they even get these positions? And like I was saying, if you deconstruct it, it comes down to, okay, I went to school, then I went to college, then I went to uni, I went da-da-da-da. The more you deconstruct it, you'll find that it amounts to privilege. How did you even get to college? So that's when the narrative then becomes more streamlined. So yes, it starts off at a macro level, very, very overwhelming. But then, as you streamline it further through a process of deconstructing and questioning, then I think you'll try to get to the narrative that you want. I don't know if I've answered your question, but
I have a simpler one, if it's okay to simplify to that level. You'll have to do it to figure it out. That's what I have eventually realized. There isn't a rule book for, especially these two questions, because even power structure is such a big spectrum, and how it plays out. Even with the same person, day one is different and day two has been different in oral histories. And similarly, subjectivity. You think you will be close to it. There have been so many participants who have said, I'll be so deep into it, but they've not connected for a very long time into their projects. So these are also some notions which we think they exist, but they perform or they play out very differently. So that's my shortest answer. You'll do it, you will get it.
Aparna, thank you so much for asking me to be a respondent. Also, I'll just take this opportunity to Dr. Shwetal and Kaustav as well. We've been talking a lot, and the way both of you responded to my workshop yesterday on critical thinking, ecology, and politics of representation. There are certain shared themes. We have around 5. Can I speak for 5 minutes or so? Right? So, as you know, my archiving project is not private. It is a very public-facing one, and one of the reasons why I was in this workshop was because it's very different from writing an academic paper, having something like an exhibition. So the medium is very different. And that's how I went at it. Now, when it comes to your projects, the first thing that we have is first of all, Kaustav, as we talked about this, we are all undergraduates, right? And the subjectivity is always there. So as opposed to this division between writing an academic article versus having an archive, where you're just putting things, it helps to think that there is always a curatorial politics. There is never a neutral, in the same way in which we were talking about how no design or coding or sentence is neutral. A bias or an opinion always surfaces through how you're telling your story. There is always a narrative in any archive. It's not just this haphazard. It can be fragmented. It doesn't have to be an entirely overwritten narrative, but it's there always. So what I would be really interested to see in both your works is the way in which you develop a little bit of a sort of critical commentary. These are important objects. We are not questioning that. They need to be in an archive. We are not questioning the validity of it. But in what ways are you stringing them, or what is your own very subjective, very personal critical response to them, right? That is one thing that I'm very interested in. And again, it doesn't have to be an academic article. I will not bring theory in this. So Ishita made me not go towards putting up a little more critical poster that I had, and that helped, because that was the entire point of this exercise. So yes, it is there, but especially if it's an archive is dissemination facing, because Aparna is directly thinking of books, and this is not going to be the first book. And Kaustav's entire project about his family archiving is talking to an audience. It is an exhibition. It can be an art exhibition, but it is there, right? So especially if it is a public-facing archive, then you can't just say that it's a cluster of objects that you've just curated. The way in which you have curated it is telling its own story. It cannot be the only story, but it is a story. So what is that? Because then we can talk about how the artist or the curator is dead and we are going to interpret it, and there is always this to and fro. But I am really interested in that aspect of it. The second thing is that, the moment we are talking about personal archives, we talk about how the personal is always good. We obviously have stakes involved, otherwise we couldn't be working on these projects. But there is a sense of intimacy and immediacy that comes with personal archives, right? Because we personally know these people. So turning something personal into the object of a presentation, whether it's a critical commentary, whether it's in whichever way in which you're representing, it's an act of representation. The archive is an action, right? So there is that very strongly, how you're responding to them. What is your critical response? Because this is not just a box, that is not just a shoehorn, buffalo horn opera. There are stories and associations and curations. And how is that coming through very strongly? And the second thing that comes with all of this is, in Kaustav's case, he was talking about the development from Shatkira to Koichi. In Aparna's case, we had very clearly these certain extraordinary moments of history. And all of these archives have tried foregrounding the fact that everyday life activities are not just background music to extraordinary history writing. They constitute them, right? So are you going to mention these only as signposts and say, this person was alive at this point, or they had this one photo of this moment? Or is there some kind of a thought about connecting these or locating it? Again, none of these have a perfect answer, but how you respond, how are you thinking about it? Because whether you admit or acknowledge it or not, there is a critical commentary happening, right? So, yes, so that is the part that we've been living with your archives and your stories for 6 to 8 months as well now. So we have been watching them develop. So it would be really good to see the next bit of it where we see that a little more. That's the one part of it. The second thing is when it comes to Shwetal and auditing. We talk of cultural artifacts in terms of material objects and embodied experience and tangible things. And all of your archives are blurring these lines very deliberately. It's the way in which, say, if we didn't know the story that comes with Srinidhi's mother's and grandmother's sewing machine, we will be able to relate to it. Right? when you're doing something like that, first of all, there is always a question of speaking inwards, outwards. Are you talking to people from Baroda? Are you talking to people who do not know about Garba, or people like me who lived in Baroda incidentally and found out about it? And again, it can be partial. It doesn't have to be absolute and it's perfect. Right? Along the way, when it comes to something like Garba, again, as you kept showing even in your slides, that these can't be 5 separate slides. They all have to come together. It's an embodied experience. And when we were talking about the lyrics of these songs that you were teaching us yesterday, we keep talking about this element of subversion. And it, in so far as archives are fragmented, incidentally somebody picked a box from a stall 7 years back. Who knows why another box was picked? But at the same time, they contradict or subvert some kind of a mainstream narrative. In your case, you're talking about a localized Baroda history of Garba and why that matters. And along the way, we talked to Auntie and I learned about place and everything else that comes with it. And there are so many threads, as I said, it's a bit of a fabric. You pull the thread of gender and you talk about marriages and what's happening. There's so many things that can be unpacked there. Right? When we are talking about something like that, when we are going into that direction, we have this very fun thing that we do with documents. So I'm currently translating chapters of scans. So there was this contagious disease that happened in India, and my work was primarily on gender empire politics. So there was happened along the way. And a rule had come out from the British government about forceful medical examination of sex workers. And there is a lot of information, data, medical documents about it. What I'm doing is I run a tiny project from University of Goa, and I'm translating these popular chapters, which have a completely different and fascinating level. And when it is subverting, changing, conforming, isn't stereotypical, it's not stereotypical, there is so much. Especially because your archive is talking about a very popular, lived, embodied practice with a material culture that comes with it. The moment you start talking about it, one caution I would have is not falling into stereotypes. Because the entire point of this project is to show how people become biased, and it needs to be remembered. The second part of it is that when we talk about popular culture, it's very fun because somebody will find popular culture as something that's very dominant, very hegemonic, but simultaneously very resistant or transformative. It's always treading these two lines. And Garba is a perfect example of that.
I just want to quickly answer the critical framework thing, which is very valid. So this archive, the one on my father and all of that, that is a personal archive which is for the members of my family, like the subsequent generations, like even my son, my nieces, nephews, And like I was saying earlier, I did not particularly care for the mainstream narrative that we were raised on, that all these people have a halo on their heads. So I am the younger generation, and they are strict, really, really critical thinkers. To go beyond, like the seen and the unseen document dichotomy that I was telling you about. Like for instance, when I went to the Amritsar, the Partition Museum, I was absolutely shocked because so many of those historical events were mentioned in my family's narratives. And then I was looking through the dates. My great-grandfather was in Lahore in 1919, the time of Jallianwala Bagh. Now that is something I want to put into the archive, since we're talking about a critical commentary. So it's all very well to maybe elevate his career to like a height, and it's very commendable. By all means, he had to pass an exam in Urdu, and as a traditional South Indian, you only speak Tamil or Kannada. I mean, where is Urdu? So all of that is very commendable. But what was he doing in 1919? He was in the neighboring state. So Lahore and Amritsar They are neighboring states. How did he feel about working for the Raj at that time during Jallianwala Bagh? So those are the kind of questions we were never told to ask. So this archive is going to be questioning and critical. So I think that kind of answers your question.
So this is something that I have done without ever having any formal training. I wrote something after having sat down with my family members about my great grandmother, and I write poetry based on this. So just wanted to throw it open to an audience, because we have been discussing about the, for the want of a better word, end products of all these journeys. So either they are books or they are, collections, they are exhibitions. Can the written word, and I am taking creative licenses when I say I am writing poetry, can that also be looked at as an end product to a journey where you are trying to discover things? What would the critical parts of such a thing be? Because I am very much bringing in my kind of thrust into it if I am writing something out. But it is a collective endeavor. I sat with my aunts and everybody, and then I wrote out some 5 pages worth, then I edited it all out, and then I wrote what I wanted to, kind of a thing. So where does that stand as an end product, from a critical this?
Even if you thought of it as an end product, it is quite unique, isn't it? Because of its collaborative nature. That it is not something that only you are thinking about, but it's come out of conversations you've had about the past in the present. So there's a range of things that have happened. Also, it's important to document how emotional responses can change to the same event and towards the same person from generation to generation, which is also what my workshop yesterday was doing. A letter written by one generation to another, but the person who's receiving the memory can, like for instance, you're writing a poem based on your great grandmother, but that is your individual emotional response, which is also a part of an archive because you're receiving the archive. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't necessarily need to resonate with the original.
And I just wanted to also add before I forget that it could also be a part of the archive. That's all I wanted to say. So while you are seeing it as an end product, it's end product today in time. And then tomorrow you wanted to build with it something else, it will become an archiving part of an archive or an archival object itself. So it could be that.
Yeah, in my understanding, I'm looking at archival objects not as an professional archivist or something like. I'm not trying to construct archive in that way. I'm looking at it in a way how it is there in use. So whatever it is in Katha or any kind of objects and photographs, they are still in use. We are seeing it in our dining table or during the chit chats and all. So it is not there in a showcase or in a museum kind of construction. It is in our hand. So that is the way I'm looking at. In that way, stories storytelling comes into my practice also. So that in that way, I'm trying to navigate my work. So it's not like my works are in a way addressing the archive actually, preserving this, preserving those stories in a visual manner. Yeah, not only archive is not only about objects, also about stories. So in a way, I'm trying to archive stories also.
Curation instead of what we always talk about archives in terms of what gets to enter an archive or what gets to be on a museum or in a curio cabinet, right? So that itself, there's a lot of work that is happening on everyday life practices and the importance of looking at ordinary everyday life practices. So, it would be really good to see how you're taking this train of thought forward. Keep talking about some of these things. So, last thing to wrap up the evening, I think. One of the most freeing things about this entire workshop and the last few months for me has been this way in which, typically when we look at any project, there is this opinion or statement, and then the rest of it is sort of evidence building and making that look persuasive. And as opposed to something like that, or since the evening started with history writing and what does it mean? So much of archive feels exactly archaeological in the way one other people talk about, where in real life lived complexities are not that great. There is no granular region, there are disruptions and stabilities, contradictions that sometimes undermine the very thing that they are trying to establish. And therefore archives pulling through that thought of archaeology allow for these different fragments that don't always have to make sense. Or if I'm talking about, say, I'm currently working with period talk. So we are trying to look at oral histories through online interviews of people undergoing periods, menstruation, men and women, and the type of stories that are coming. And the typical stereotypical expectation is we'll only hear horror stories. But we are talking about a global south country, and there is a lot of menstruation stigma, as we know. And if you bring in trans experience and everything else there, not binary experience, it gets even more difficult. But of course, the hope of that archive is to show that there are all kinds of stories, not just not just one kind of stories, right? So that is this very freeing thing that this entire workshop has done for me, to have these things and just live with it. That's so.
I think that's a good note. Takes off the pressure for me also to have an ending note. That we have lots of fragments. Even for today, it's a little difficult for me to weave, to be very fair and honest, because I think emotionally at least, or psychologically, we went through different kinds of experiences through the 2-3 hours. And that's what histories or archives are more fun about, rather than this one linear, conclusive experience. So hopefully we will all keep living multiple histories through our experiences, our projects, and with everyone else's. With that, thank you so much, everyone. You can clap for yourselves. Thank you so much.